So today's focus is going to be on Commitment 1 of the Climate and Environment Charter for Humanitarian Organizations. And this commitment calls on us to step up our response to growing humanitarian needs and help people to adapt to impacts of climate and environment crisis. We're already witnessing how climate and environment crises disproportionately impact communities in vulnerable contexts and situations. And regardless of what we do, these impacts are not going to disappear. The trends and data actually show that the disasters we're facing are indeed likely to increase, become more frequent, and higher in intensity. So this particular commitment focuses on how we can use climate change adaptation methods, disaster risk reduction, early warning, anticipatory action, among others, to adapt our programs to better support and strengthen people's resilience to current and future climate and environment risks. And what does that mean then for us as humanitarian organizations, and especially NGOs? We need to identify ways of how we can step up our response to growing humanitarian needs. We saw this happening with COVID-19. While humanitarian operations were ongoing, we had to step up and increase our response to the COVID-19 emergency. IFRC's latest data show that from the start of the COVID-19 pandemic until August this year, 2021, extreme weather events have affected at least 139.2 million people and killed at least 17,000 people in over 433 unique events. And these do not estimate people affected by extreme temperatures or mortality during drought events, for example. Then the next one that we should be looking at in this commitment and what it explains is how do we include in a more systematic manner, DRR, climate change adaptation, and anticipatory action in our work. For humanitarian organizations, this most often means more preparedness and prevention work, increasing our work to see how we can help communities already who are impacted the most, have negative impacts, who are having negative impacts, be able to prepare themselves before they are hit. So more prevention action. Then we're also looking at how do we include climate and environment risks in our planning. And here we are looking at how do we integrate climate and environment risk management into our work to make our work more climate smart. Climate smart programs on operations use available weather forecasts, early warning, climate science to inform our operations so that they're enabling communities also to anticipate and absorb and adapt to climate shocks. And last but not least, there's a few more other things, but how do we support those most at risk? While we are already working with populations that are either displaced, refugees, migrants, or vulnerable to conflicts, or are in fragile contexts, we have to take into account women, girls, older people, people with disabilities, more into our programming and looking at the risks that are faced for these groups and other marginalized and vulnerable groups that are at even more risk. So this is kind of what this commitment looks at. And we're trying to showcase some of these lessons learned and how our NGOs have been using some of these methods and means to incorporate into their programs and their projects. In terms of targets, the Charter Commitments page has suggested a few examples on how organizations could take into consideration setting targets. A little bit on what those targets could look like, depending on the mandate and the scale, and what one could commit to and work towards as organizations. So I would suggest please do go look at the guidance provided under Commitment 1. My colleague Edith will share some of these links. And on today's webinar, while we share a few lessons learned on some of the adaptation, anticipation, DRR and preparedness measures taken by NGOs, there are many more lessons out there. And we will try and share these with you in the coming learning series. And I'm sure you yourselves have so much of lessons that you can share during this conversation. We can also check out ICWA's annual conference, which happened in May this year, where speakers shared lessons learned during the conference and the World Cafe sessions, and further links to the resources on the topic page. So over to you, Manisha.
Thank you very much, Nishani, and I apologize for my connection. I'm traveling and back in Canada visiting my mom, and apparently our internet is causing me some problems. I apologize. But thank you for that overview, and I think we've got a great panel today who is going to speak to us about those different topics in that commitment that you just outlined. So it's my pleasure to introduce our three speakers. Oh, look, I'm on two different, oh no, I'm sorry. I'm connecting on two different devices so I can see the chat. I apologize. The first speaker, it's my pleasure to introduce all three of them, is Mihir Bhatt, and it's great to see you again, Mihir. I haven't seen you in a while. Mihir is the director of the All India Disaster Mitigation, AIDMI. He'll be sharing with us how his institute is working to adapt to climate change in India, working with the humanitarian community. Then have Azmat Khan, who is the Chief Executive Officer of the Foundation for Rural Development, or FRD, in Pakistan. He will be sharing an example of a project that they have designed to help mitigate increased flooding in the country. And last but not least, we'll be hearing from Razabul Kadar, who is the Monitoring, Evaluation and Learning Coordinator of Coast's project of ICO, which is part of CORDAIDS in Bangladesh. He'll be describing his organization's work on mitigating the effects of coastal flooding on salinity affected farmers. And as already mentioned, we hope that all of you who are joining us today will also share your own questions, comments, or even your own examples in the chat and the Q&A. So to start us off, I'd like to invite Mihir to please take the floor. Thanks, Mihir.
So, thank you so much. I'm very delighted to be both with ACWA and PHAP. Azmat Khan, Salam, and Kadirji, my very best wishes to you as well. I'm going to talk about adapting to the impacts of climate and environmental crisis. And as you could see, and in the content at the next slide, what I'm going to give you is an introduction of where I'm coming from, and take you to first on the impact of heat waves on the populations as first area. Second, I'll quickly but concretely tell you about farming, especially impact of women linking with climate change and COVID-19. There is a mix and quite complex situation there. The third is the intersectionality on climate, pandemic, and gender in India, Nepal, and Bangladesh, which is a new work which is started by a whole range of organizations. And fourth is the state of humanitarian system in India. And that is again work that is started by a group of organizations and stakeholders. And we are one small part of that. So I'll talk about that, all of that in the light of our overall topic of adapting to the impacts of climate and environment. And I suggest, if I may, a way ahead. So that's what I have laid out for us today. As an introductory remark, two things I'd like to highlight. And first is that I'll be drawing from All India Disaster Mitigation Institute's work with local partners and national partners as well, and some global partners, predominantly global partners. And I mentioned that specifically because it's a long list, but a lot of work that we have done, in fact, most of it is because of them, with them. And what I'm presenting is just as an instrument to present here. None of this necessarily is ours or we own it or it's original. So please accept their contribution to this particular session. And second is I picked up 4 areas which are rather odd for you to see on a presentation like that. And that's precisely why I have picked up. What I did was looked at series of presentations and current work that is ongoing on adapting adapting to the impacts of climate and environmental crisis. And I looked at what is it that needs to be talked about, but is not talked about. And therefore, you have these four areas which I think needs to be talked about and looked at more carefully because it affects large number of population, people, men, women, and children. And again, this is our work with a range of organizations. I like mention that sometimes name of the organization or person, if I remember both. And this is the work that I want to present today. Please ask questions now, but I'll answer them subsequently when I'm asked to answer them. Thank you. Next slide, please. So let's start with the impact of heat waves on populations. And this is a global work done by UNEP. Many of you must be knowing, and if you know, please do look up. It's a very important part of the humanitarian system. It continuously improves the system's performance quietly and is pushing, adapting to the environmental crisis. So you may want to look at it that very carefully. Group URD, and also looking at another organization, Prepare, that Paul Knox is working. The local work with 2 city authorities and 3 citizen groups I'm also presenting. City authorities, namely Ahmedabad Municipal Corporation and the capital of Chhattisgarh district, state in India. And the 3 citizen groups are related to the groups which are with street vendors, which are the construction labor, and third is the public health workers out under the heat. As you know, that IPCC SREX report has said that the heat waves will increase both in its impact as well as spread, and that is what has happened. And one of the things that is happening in terms of adapting to awareness to reduce the impact is, I'd like to give an example where the Indian Meteorological Department tried to use its data differently. That is that instead of releasing data and let people decide if they want to use it or not, which was the case before, they targeted their data to specific groups such as farmers, urban residents, slum dwellers, municipal corporation officers, and send them the meteorological data as early warning. And as a result, in the city of Ahmedabad, the mortality rate has been reduced to a considerable extent. So one of the ways of adapting is awareness. The second example is adapting investment, and that is finance. That is city authority worked with other financing institutions, formal and informal, to help people whitewash their roof so that or replace them with cool roof technology, which a very good organization called Mahila Housing Trust is working on in Ahmedabad city and many other cities. And as a result, poor people as well as people who can afford are able to reduce the impact of heat wave 3 to 4, sometimes 5 degrees in the areas where they live. And for the poor, the area where they live, also where they work. It's a home-based work. And so that's a big impact on the lives and livelihoods of the people by adapting to have finance to whitewash the roofs. The third example, which is very interesting, is bottom-up adaptation, such as whitewashing of roof surfaces and making them more cost and time effective. As I explained before, that before the monsoon, before the set of summer, this is what is happening. Then there is an example of settlement level park, forest, lake, and similar natural features within the city are enhanced, made more dense, are made bigger in some cases to make sure that the heat wave related impact, overall impact on the city and city dwellers is reduced. And the last mile communication from Indian Meteorological Department with city authorities for 1 week in advance that each day of the next week what the heat wave impact will be is shared with the city authority to line up not only the response and water, drinking spaces, and but also ambulances and keeping the hospitals ready to have people coming in with heat wave impact on that. So that's an example of heat waves, impact of heat waves on population, how a city can respond to that by adapting awareness, investment, and other measures. Thank you. Next, please. This is another area which is rural and the impact of women living with climate change and COVID. And we've been working with female farmers or women who are owner of their farm with their family are forgotten in on most policy and research. And therefore, that's something we focused on from the agriculture point of view, but also from the point of view of disaster risk reduction and climate change. And in all three areas, these female farmers are quite far behind in the policy priority. The women farmers do most farming and most adaptation work on the farm and with their family. Not necessarily, therefore, they have the most say in what is being done. And in fact, even less say on what the money that comes in because of that farming that they are instrumental in bringing in. These women farmers innovate, but receive least upgrading or upscaling support. So they make changes in the way they farm, from sowing to all the way to harvesting, to adapt to the changing climate. But those innovations remain to that particular farm or that particular set of female farmers, women farmers. There is no upgrading or upscaling support, financial or technical or training, which helps them do that. This work, as I said, is being done with IFPRI. It's an international agency, and the farmers themselves, and Women's Union, the Self-Employed Women's Association, is one of the key members of this large effort. It is in 3 states of India, 4,500 farmers, and there are 2 adapting activities that I want to underline. One is that direct market links with the consumers. So because of the climate change and because of the COVID, and then there was a lockdown, they had the produce ready, harvest ready, but they couldn't sell it. And they adapted by making a direct market link with the urban consumers and selling that stuff directly and not via the usual supply chain. And that was an adaptation measure which worked to the advantage of the farmers and to the consumers, urban consumers both. And the second one was adapting to enhance the storage and holding capacity. So they couldn't store their vegetables, their fruits, their more important grains, and they borrowed money to enhance the storage capacity, either cold storage or storage within their house or near their house, and that was another way they upgraded. Next, please. This is a very interesting work that a global network of activists and researchers under the auspices of GRIP is doing, and it's all across the globe. And at the regional level, there's a very active and long-standing network called Duryog Vivadan has taken up this work. And they are looking at the interplay between climate, pandemic, gender, and how they multiply the impact and the vulnerability of especially women. This work is being done with local authorities, such as the district authority, with local groups, such as milk producers or self-help groups, and individual women. And 2 aspects, I can talk more, but 2 aspects of that I want to underline quickly before I go to the next and final example, is adapting to work at the intersection with basic income. That is, if you start any adaptation measure, not necessarily at health or education sector, energy, but at employment, there is an intersection of several things, climate, pandemic, gender, at least in South Asia. And that also work in basic income, you immediately start addressing not 1 or 2, but several of the priorities of the individual woman and her family. So the work is the pivot around which all these things will be addressed if you start addressing their work. And second is the well-being, and well-being going beyond social protection, beyond health, public health, and community health, but overall well-being And that is another area of which is the intersection to address climate, pandemic, and gender-related wide range of very persistent, strong challenges that these women and their families face. Next. This is the last, and I would like to, as you know, there is a state of humanitarian system reports that are being done for quite some time by ALNAF, and a whole large number of members who are taking that further. As a result, a lot of change has taken place on the humanitarian system globally. And this year, there is an initiative that is being taken by the World Food Programme, the Sphere India, and there's a technical advisory group which includes the national authorities, national institutes, UN bodies, academics, activists, media, etc. And they've come together to look at the ways of strengthening the humanitarian system in India. It is very much forward-looking, and it is very much looking at what are the changes that could be made to strengthen the existing system. The reason was that the system is isolated from adaptation measures. Whatever work that has been done so far, it is being led by an eminent author for this particular report, Chakrabarti Sir. And the work so far, the work is not finished. It is just in the early days. And what it is saying is that the system, the humanitarian system, is isolated from adaptation measures. And we'll see if that's the case or not. But early flag. And I think that's true for many other systems in many other countries in the region as well. The national coverage is being done with the 6 states that are case studies. And there also you find that at a sub-national level, the humanitarian system and adaptation-related measures are not necessarily or hardly linked at all. The addressing adaptation of the governance system is very important. That is, you have a district disaster management plan and you have a district climate management or climate change plan, action plan. And how do you merge them, the state plans, district plans, and at the household level? So that governance of the system, lower you go, the more important the adaptation becomes. And that hasn't taken place. And that's something important to keep in mind, working in India, in South Asia, I would suggest. And the second adaptation is there is no anticipation of climate crisis, environmental marginalization, so on and so forth. And that is something the system is still not standing up to as far as this particular effort is concerned. Thank you. Next, please. So I'd like to sum up by saying that some sort of a learning stream, it's not steam, I'm sorry, to consolidate utilization, to leverage what is being experienced at a local level. Second is to distinct learning reviews by regional members of people like us who are on this, and forecast learning areas by regional members would also be very useful to make sure that we have the idea of adapting to the climate change related challenges. Adapting to the impacts of climate and environmental crisis. Humanitarian action can be taken up further. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mahir. Really appreciate that presentation. And I think you've helped set us off on a really good conversation for this next hour and a half that we've got. I've moved locations in the meantime, and hopefully my internet will last. Nishani, do you want to ask a couple of questions, or shall I ask what we've got in the Q&A first? Because I see that we have a question from Adam and Fiona.
Go ahead with the questions, and I think there's quite a few coming in already. So let's start with that.
Super. So Mahir, I've got a couple of questions for you that have come in. Could you explain what the system is isolated from adaptation measures means, please? And does this mean that the system is not prepared from your perspective? And then also a question from Fiona on which part of the Indian government is leading on DRR and climate change? And I'll let you maybe answer those two, and I think we may have some others in the chat as well.
Please ask easy questions.
I know.
No, answer the second question first, and not because it's easy, but it's factual. And sometimes I wonder that as well, that which part of the government is leading this, but because there's just so much happening. I mean, you have a pandemic, and then you have a cyclone, and then you have floods, and it's all various departments. But by and large, there is a National Disaster Management Authority, which is firmly seated in the center, with Prime Minister as its chair, and the members, eminent people. They lead, and the state disaster management authorities address the disasters. And the climate work, changing climate, all that work is being done by the Environment Ministry, which is the Ministry of Climate Change, Forestry, and Environment. So that's a separation, that's a broad division for our purpose. Very often they meet, especially on NDC, they meet and work jointly to make sure that the overlap between DRR and climate change related risks are addressed. But that's happening only since Paris agreement, and perhaps, in my opinion, a bit slowly than it should actually do. So that's the second question. And the first question is
sorry if I could interrupt. Before you answer the first question, I saw we also have a very similar question from Stephanie around how is the humanitarian system isolated from the adaptation measures specifically, and how is the humanitarian coordination system working towards a more integrated approach? So very linked to the first question that we had from Adam around the isolation again.
So there is, it's isolated and it's not isolated. It is not isolated because people who are affected, the large number of people who are affected, for them, there is no isolation. You have flood, and is it climate change related recovery or is it humanitarian recovery? Makes no difference whatsoever. It is not connected in a sense that the resources which come in through relief measures look at only the relief-related results and not necessarily invest those results so that some of the other items can be addressed, which are climate change related. To give you a concrete example, the relief measure on shelter, and they would obviously build the best shelter that they can, the relief agencies, Government of India, to make sure that the person has a house to stay. They are not necessarily the greenhouse in terms of the technology and material use, or clean house in terms of the carbon footprint that they have. One of the old examples is the large number of houses built after the tsunami, roughly 40,000, very good houses, and the price has gone tenfold of those houses. But the environmental cost and the environmental damage by those houses is 10 times more than the actual price of the house. So that is something, that's the reason why both are not connected together. I don't think it's very difficult to connect. It does need some creativity, ingenuity, but it should be eternal, ongoing, and not something once you decide it will happen by default. Thank you.
Super. Thank you so much, Mahir. And I think it is making those efforts to make those connections much more so we get past that disconnect that is there right now. But Nishani, I'm going to turn to you, as I think you may also have a couple other questions to ask.
Yes, thanks, Mahir. I think it's really interesting and very timely that you bring about the heat waves. And this is something we're seeing faced around the world. It is one of the top 10 between floods and heat waves. This is the top 10 in 2020 causes for people to actually die. So this is a new trend that we're seeing. And I don't think in the humanitarian sector, we're really prepared for heat waves as such. Do you have any examples from the work you've been doing in India and the work that's been done on the ground of how this has been incorporated in some of the work in terms of preparedness before, while you mentioned in the city limits? Is there anything that has been done outside that might be useful for our NGOs who are working in the ground in more context of humanity displacement context? Over.
Yeah, there's a large number of measures which could be taken by humanitarian actors and members of ECWA. So let me start with at the top, and those members who are doing policy work. It's very important to demand a national heat wave action plan if there isn't one in your country. and also demand the heat wave impact insurance, because when people fall sick or not, or die, which they do, it's not necessarily covered as a specific hazard or specific aspect that insurance has covered, and therefore they don't end up either getting the health insurance related to that or the other insurance. So that's something your members may want to work at a national level. At subnational level, there is a very concrete thing you could do, and which is what we did with a large number of partners, with the CPKN, NRDC from USA, Ahmedabad Municipal Corporation, and many others. And the Ahmedabad Heatwave Action Plan for the city was actually turned into a training module to train and get interested other cities in India, and more than 18 cities during that year picked up that planning. I think now many more cities are doing that planning before the heat wave, before the summer. And subsequently, we crossed the borders from India to Pakistan, and we helped demonstrate how such planning at the city level could be done to the municipal corporations, not one or two, 18 of them, to the organization called LEAD in Pakistan. And they picked up, and subsequently they took it further to say that how those municipal corporations can actually bring down the loss of life and subsequently impact on the livelihood of people in those 18 different municipal corporations in Pakistan. That's a subnational level. And at the local level, the most important three aspects. One is the vulnerable population. That is street vendors. We know they'll be, and every city in Asia, South Asia, is exposed to a large number of street vendors. So some measures from them. And they actually know what measures they want. They don't have resources to do that. So making sure that. Second is construction labor. A large number of construction labor in all our cities, all our rural areas. They are out in open under the sun with their children, newborn babies on the construction sites, and no measures. So what kind of protection we can give them? It's not very difficult to think of that. So that's second part. And third part is the people who are like police, health workers, the transportation staff, drivers, and others, and special measures for them. So that's something NGOs can take up and assist. So these are the three areas at the local level. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Mihir. That was very extensively in different levels. You explained to us how people can take action and NGOs can take action. Maybe we have one more last question to you from Getashu. How do you see the role of customary traditional institutions in adaptation and climate change resilience over the state's institutions in India?
Customary traditional institutions. And,
I'm assuming
yeah.
Maybe we have community level organizations so coming from Sri Lanka, we have these organizations that work in customary traditional level where there's a death, they all get together in the community and they actually look after each other. But there is also these community organizations that are involved. How does that maybe work in interplay would be the question I think she's trying to ask.
Yeah, that's an excellent question. And they do a lot actually. And it doesn't get first reported and therefore not counted, and therefore we don't know how much money they've spent. Sometimes they end up spending far more money than the international aid, which comes for heat wave related support. But that's a very different issue. These groups, I will separate them in two ways. One is to think of them as religious, semi-religious, spiritual organizations, and second is more sort of social cultural organizations. Either way, they play a very active role, and they have done it traditionally for a long time. For example, during the summer, to build what is called PIAO, or public drinking water places on the roads, was very popular, very common. And so that's what they used to do. And now they've turned that into having water coolers at public places to make sure that people have clean water to drink. Similarly, these groups used to have what is called resting areas built, sarai, and now what some of them, not all of them, have done is help extend the cantilever around the buildings. So there is more shaded area between the building and the road, so that the people inside the building feel less heat but those on the road can hop in to the semi-open area to protect themselves from. So that's in terms of heat. Also in terms of food, for example, there is a tradition, and it continues in many parts of India, Gujarat especially, where I'm located, is to offer chas, which is very thin buttermilk, and which is supposed to increase the water content in the body, but also reduce the heat wave impact on your body. And that, so there's a whole range, but it's not necessarily organized, and therefore the overall impact, we don't always know where and how much it is. Thank you for the question.
Super. Thank you so much, Mahir. And I think that last point around, we don't always know what everyone is doing, I think is quite important also, that there's different levels of response to climate change, and we're not necessarily able to capture all of that, but those all come together to contribute. But I think that point you raised about the disconnect between the preparedness and climate change and humanitarian action, I think is something that we need to really be thinking about. So thank you for that, Mahir. And I also see that we've got some questions around from Javed on Pakistan. We experienced the heat wave in one of the world's largest cities, Karachi, in recent years. And what actions can government do in order to cope to that effect? And as well, how can global agencies help in those scenarios, which I think is a perfect shift over to our next speaker, Azmat from the Foundation for Rural Development in Pakistan. And Azmat, maybe when you're doing your presentation, you can touch upon what the government is doing, and maybe you already have that in your presentation. Thank you again, Mahir. I'm going to pass over to Azmat, but we'll have time at the end to come back to you as well, Mahir, for other questions.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. And salam as well, sir.
Thank you. Azmat, you're on mute still.
Hi. Good evening, good afternoon, good morning, wherever you are on this planet, because I see a lot of people joining from different time zones. And thank you so much for registering and attending this webinar. We are going to talk about some nature-based solution for disaster risk reductions. And let me clarify it right from the beginning, that this is not a project we are presenting. This is a component which we incorporated in our existing one of the project, which was mainly on the livelihoods. This is an initiative of FRD, the organization for which I am working in Pakistan, and it is supported by the World Food Program. But first, let's go to the country background, which is on the next slide. And Pakistan overall is the 5th worst affected country by disasters, which are caused by the climate change. And this is the reference from the Global Climate Risk Index. While on the other hand, if we calculate the emissions made by Pakistan, the greenhouse gas emission is less than 1%. So from this slide, you can easily see the inequity or inequality of the impact of climate change, whether some community or some country is contributing to the climate change or not, whether they are contributing to the greenhouse gas emission or not, but still they are impacted the worst. So this does not, this is not an equal thing, but still one can imagine that how climate change is not really directed to the individual's actions, but overall this is a global phenomenon. And now we are going to the project background, which is on the next slide. Thank you so much for changing the slide. The project initially was planned for the returnee, internally displaced people, and those peoples returned to their areas of origin, and they had disrupted livelihoods. And let me clarify one thing, that we are talking about the northwest of Pakistan, which traditionally used to be called Farda, but now it is called the newly merged district. And WFP and FRD, we had been working on the revival of livelihood since 2015, where the focus of our intervention was to enable the returning IDPs to restart their livelihoods. And this was done by rehabilitation of irrigation channels, rehabilitation of farm to market roads. We also tried to transfer some new skills to the community to diversify their livelihoods and thus make their livelihoods more resilient. And these all activities were carried out with conditional food or cash. Like in some cases, we provided the food baskets to those people who participated in the activities, and in some cases we provided cash to those participants who participated in the activities. And now we are going to the next slide, which is why the rest, like why we opted for the nature-based solution. Number one thing is that the northwest of Pakistan, we are suffering from the depleting aquifer under groundwater. The groundwater is going down day by day, and if you have to get water from the aquifer or from the underground source, you have to dig deeper with each passing year. And this is like, according to our understanding, multiple factors have actually caused this. But one factor is that the rainfall patterns are changing. Previously, like 15, 20 years ago or 25 years ago, we had regular and steady rainfalls throughout the year. Like we had rainfalls in the summer, we had rainfalls in the winter and spring and autumn, like, but with different intervals. But now that rainfall pattern has changed, and we experience usually very long dry spells where we do not get any rain. And when it rains, then we get showering or cloud burst like situations. So if I say it in other words, we either do not have water, in another situation, or on another hand, we have so much water that we cannot manage. And one other factor in this northwest of Pakistan is the steep slopes in the area. Like we have very steep slopes, and whenever we get these cloudbursts or showering after rain, the steep slopes give very little time to the rainwater to get absorbed to the ground and recharge the aquifer. So this is contributing to both aspects of the water. Like we do have water scarcity, and water doesn't get enough time to get absorbed into the ground. And again, we have a lot of water on very steep areas which cannot be slowed down or stopped there. So it forms flash floods downstream. And then we are going to discuss on the other slide that what we really do. As I shared earlier, that our area of operation is the northwest of Pakistan, and today I am seeing a lot of my Pakistani friends too. So to be very specific for them, we are talking about two districts, District Koram and a part of District Moban. So our working area is that area where the flash floods actually originate from. Like the sources of the flash floods are these mountains where we are working here. And the second thing why we opted for this is that the intervention we are going to discuss required availability of stones, and the stones are naturally available in these mountains and these areas. So it is very low cost. We do not have to transport stones and things from these. And we engage the local communities, many of whom are returning IDPs, or at least even if they are stayees, they have been affected, their livelihood have been affected. So we involve them for for construction of small check dams. Some people call it gully plugs, some people call it check dams, and we are going to see on another slide that how do we do it. But to make, yes, and apologies that this one picture on the leftmost is another category, but you can see from these three pictures, the rightmost top one and the two lower one. This is the slope of the area. You can just imagine if you pour water onto this surface, how long it can stay there. It is going just to wash away, and it is going to form into a flood. Now we are going to see that how we do it on the next slide. You can see the local communities, who these communities are actually getting either cash for work, food for work as a reward for this, and they do collect the stones from these areas, and they do construct these small check dams. If we can go to the next slide, so you just can then, yes. Now, in all the three pictures, you can see like these four pictures these same places have been shown to you on the previous slide. And now you see that there are small walls which are made up of dry stone masonries mainly. And if we just go into the next, that how it works in the flood, so we are going to play a video for you. I request my colleagues who are operating from there. This video was, yes. Thank you so much, my facilitators on the back end of this presentation. This video was captured by one of the community member, because you see that the steep slopes in the area, and the showering of the rain does not allow a lot of time that we will go there and we will capture the video. So if we just go to the next slide, how it looks after the flood. So you can see a few individual check dams or gullies where very fine sand and silt have been settled down in these check dams immediately after the floods. And if we go into the rationale of this, so on the next slide, we are going to what these check dams are doing for the people and for the climate and for the environment. And number one thing is that these check dams slow down the velocity of the flood water. Similarly, the decreased velocity then contribute to the increased contact time of water with the ground and mountains. And these check dams also, like every flash flood, brings a lot of silt and sand and things like these downward. So these check dams stop the silt and sand over there, which creates small terraces of fertile soil right upstream in the origin of the flash flood. And then this fertile soil actually provides a conducive environment for germination of vegetations, and this vegetation and these plants and trees will serve as a birth engineering replacement of the check dams, because these check dams have a limited life. This is just like what it does. And if we go to the results or impact, so we are going to see it on the next slide. If I can, yes, thank you so much. Just one slide back, please, on the impact. One slide back, please. Thank you so much. The impact of these check dams is that the increased contact time of water with the ground, it provides more time for ground to absorb the water into it, and thus this absorbed water by the ground and the mountains in the upstream areas, it contributes to recharging the underground water in the long run. Like it will take years, but still it is contributing. Number two, the impact of this is that the velocity or the speed of the water is decreased right from the start. So we cannot stop floods all over there, but at least the reduced velocity decreases the soil erosion downstream. And again, linking these two impacts, if the ground absorbs some water, then theoretically as well as practically, the quantity of the flood water is also decreased downstream. And number third impact is very interesting of this this intervention, because this was not in our mind when we were initially designing it, that most of the sand and the silt and the soil, the debris of the soil, they are sort of hold over there, right in the origin of the floods. And the flood water gets a bit cleaner, but the flood water has to take something. And we do have dry torrents. We call the dry torrents in our area as fault. So the previous flood have sort of accumulated a lot of sand and a lot of soil over there, which has actually raised its level, and it creates hazard for the surrounding houses and the agricultural land. But when this cleaner water is flowing through those dry torrents, so they naturally sort of deepens them. Whenever water is flowing with a velocity on a gravity base, it has to take something with it, whatever comes in its way. So this water actually, it deepens the dry torrents, and it decreases the risk for the houses and for the agricultural land. Now we are going to the next slide, and why I'm here and what we want from it. Number one thing is that we want to replicate this intervention, and we scale up this intervention. Because in the northwest of Pakistan, we have hundreds and thousands of gullies like these, which are the origin of the flood. We have had a very small intervention, and we provided check dams in like around 100. I have put it on the lower end, though the gullies where we have out, the real number is around 130, but just to be on the safe side, I had to accumulate from for both the districts, so I went on the lower side. So this is very small, like 100 gullies in comparison with hundreds and thousands. So we wish that this approach and this method could be replicated in other areas. And again, to the participants of the webinar today, if the context is same like what we shared in Pakistan, the northwest of Pakistan, if the context is similar, we expect that our friends and colleagues from the international community, they will replicate it in their areas. And again, what we are offering over here, that at least the initial programming and the program designing of your organization, we are willing to contribute our skills to anyone who are interested in a replication of this intervention. With this, I thank all of you. We have reached the end of our presentation in the terms that now my colleagues would have either taken your questions already, or if they have some mechanism of registering questions, so questions are welcome. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Azmat. It's a really interesting project. We are getting quite a lot of questions, and people are actually appreciating the pictures and the videos that it shows the before and after and what you did. I think it would be really interesting to clarify about your project initially. You mentioned when you started that your original project was not this. You adapted, basically, I'm assuming, to what was happening on the ground. So what was your, maybe a little bit about the original project and how you had to adapt it and why you had to adapt it would be maybe interesting to hear. And then also, I think to add to that, maybe Zakaria has also asked, is any tree planting being done to increase absorption of flood water by the ground? And this is part of nature-based solutions to contribute and create enhanced soil. Over.
Thank you so much, Nishani, and apologies if I do not remember the name of the other person who asked. But the background of this question, the background of this project is, I shared initially that the aim of our project was to help the returning IDPs stay back in their areas of origin. They had been absent from their areas of origin for many years, and their productive assets were sort of degraded, and they needed external support and rehabilitation of their productive assets. So this project was initially over there, and as I said during my presentation, that we were focusing on the rehabilitation of the irrigation channels and farm to market roads and all these things. But we jointly realized, like FRD and WFP, we realized that the livelihoods of these people is dependent on the natural resources, and the degradation of the natural resources or the depletion of the natural resources can be a value addition within this project. So we are thankful to our colleagues and our friends who are sitting over there in WFP that they agreed to this proposition, and we included this. On the question of plantation, thank you so much. We do have two more components exactly on this soil and water conservation, but I did not want to dilute the focus on other interventions. We do have plantation in our project, and this is really interesting that our plantation is not just plantation. We are trying to shift the livelihoods of the people from the deforestation to reforestation, because a tree provides a carbon sink, and some of our colleagues know it because we are educated. But a common man who is trying to just get some food for their families and some few foods, they do not think of the carbon sink and all these things. So during this project, we have done multiple things. And one interesting thing is that we have helped the farmers in establishing the nurseries of the walnut plants. And the walnuts, the dry nuts, dry fruit. So the people do have an interest in planting those trees as well as taking care of those trees till it starts giving food. And we have had some collaboration with the forest department. We have had collaboration with the agriculture extension department as well as with the food and agriculture organization FAO of the United Nations, and we have contributed to plantation as well on different barren surfaces. And we have had some very small level intervention, but we contributed to terracing, like utilizing those participants to establish terraces on those very steep slopes, to convert them to small terraces so that the flow of the flash flood slows down. Thank you for these questions.
maybe another related question from Ali is, how does and maybe from your experience, you could say this, how does a humanitarian aid organization assess the problem and come up with such nature-based solutions? And was there a reason that you chose, particular, I know it's an interesting question, but something to think about for others?
Yes, this is really interesting. And whenever I'm with like the pure humanitarian community, I do joke with them that it will take a long time for the humanitarians to change their thinking from just life saving through delivery of food, delivery of medical assistance, and we will start considering that this adaptation to climate change and resilience is life-saving in a long run. So this is really true that a majority of the humanitarian organizations and even humanitarian professionals, they do have a very limited focus on achieving certain results, whether through provision of shelter or through provision of food. But we were fortunate that we had a team within the FRD, and I would specifically mention those unsung heroes of my team who work in villages of Kuram and Momand, who work either as social organizers or who work as sub-engineers or engineers and whatever. They all have contributed to this designing. So I'm not taking credit as a person, but this is the credit of the organization. And yes, for a humanitarian programming, then incorporating a climate change adaptation, it is it requires a lot of negotiation and diplomatic skills. But fortunately, we had very strong argument that we are working on the livelihoods, and the livelihoods are based on the natural resources. So if our program contribute to preservation or conservation of the natural resources, so our project is going to achieve its long-term objectives as well. Wow.
Thanks a lot. Over to Manisha for a few more questions coming in.
Thanks, Nishani, and thank you so much, Azmat, for all that presentation as well as the questions. We have a couple more that I think could be really interesting to get your perspectives on. So, for example, what steps has FRD taken for the sustainability of the interventions you've done? And what would you suggest to increase the interest of the community? And then there's also another question, I think, and I think this applies not only in your situation, but also in other countries, but what is the role of government in these situations, and why is it that humanitarian organizations are having to do this work? I know that you mentioned having those links with the Department of Agriculture and Forestry, but what is the role of government in many of these situations? So maybe to hear your thoughts on that. And just a final one on, is there any evidence, since you said you were working with returnee IDPs, around what the impacts are on migration when you have these adaptations? Does it help people stay where they are? Does it have an impact on migration? Is there any evidence around that? Because Andrew from Church World Service was noting a study that they've done recently on perceptions of climate adaptation and migration, and found demand for both in-place adaptation and safer mobility options when migration is seen as a coping strategy for climate change. So your thoughts on those would be really appreciated, please.
Thank you so much for all the questions. Regarding the sustainability of the intervention, this is again a topic where we have had discussions with the communities, with our intermediaries, and as well as some donors do ask about it. And my response on this is that if you have identified the real issue of the communities and you have contributed to the solution of the communities are the one who are suffering from both, like the scarcity of water as well as the flooding. So although the communities that they do not have a lot of resources, they do not have a lot of financial resources with them, But at least in some areas where they do see the impact of this, if anyone from Pakistan and Afghanistan, we do have a tradition here which is called ashar. Ashar means like the people collectively come together and they do some communal work. Even some that communal work can be supporting one farmer in harvesting by all the villages. After his harvest, it is another farmer who gets the same support. So if the communities in this area they do get some support for their other issues, we are hopeful that they would replicate it. And I would, again, on the sustainability question, I would refer back to my presentation where we saw these check dams which have hold a lot of fine soil and fertile soil over there, and this provides a conducive environment for the germination of vegetation over there. So those could be considered as bioengineering things. And even if that check dam which we made up of stones, dry stone masonry initially, it is replaced by huge trees providing a sort of hurdle to the flow of the flash water. We will be thankful, we will be happy because we have contributed to reduced flooding, we have contributed to improve recharge to underground water, and we have also contributed to improved carbon sink. So on sustainability, that is the thing. On the government role, to be honest, this is not just with Pakistan. This is with all least developed countries, that the government doesn't has a lot of resources for this climate change adaptation, and many times they do require support from the international community as well as from the local communities. Now, the local communities, they are poor people. They cannot sort of just quit their daily skilled labor somewhere and come and contribute to such issues. But fortunately, in Pakistan, they have established one institution which is specifically called Soil and Water Conservation Department. It comes under the agricultural umbrella at large, but then it comes under the division of the water management. But again, that department or that project of the government is in its sort of its infancy stage, and we are happy that we have contributed to the learning, and we have already provided them some models for replication or for improving even the design. The question on migration is really interesting one, and as I said, the initial objective of the project on livelihood, we are going to talk about all these aspects. The main reason for focusing on the livelihood was to enable the returning IDPs stay back over there in their areas of origin, and they do not face secondary displacement, where they would be out of the screen of the media as well as the humanitarian community, and they would be more vulnerable, because when they have secondary displacement, it is quite difficult to find them assistance. So in terms of evidence, like typical research-based evidence, we are the guys with shovel and with all these tools who are picking stones and making the all these things. I hope that there would be some researches on it, and in terms of this, not only northwest of Pakistan, but even many areas of Afghanistan. We do have a pattern of seasonal migrations, where people do migrate from the upper areas to the lower areas during the winter, and because either snowfall takes place in the upper areas or the temperature goes so down that the people cannot survive over there. That is one aspect of migration. The other aspect of migration is I do not want to paint any rosy picture of this area, like from every village in the Fata, and specifically Muman and Kurum. We do have a lot of people going abroad for, and unfortunately, most of them are unskilled labor, and they do send remittances over here. So we have not stopped any migration in on that context, but at least we are contributing. Like there are some things which have to prove with time. And number one thing is that if you do not have regular and sustainable rainfalls, and your underground water is going down day by day, and you have to put more struggle in getting water, someday will come that the people will migrate from that area due to the scarcity of water. So we are contributing, sort of, we are taking an early action, and we are trying to contribute to recharge of the aquifer over there. Similarly, like if the flash floods are coming and they are washing away the agricultural lands, and those communities who are dependent on the agriculture on those lands, if they do not have land, or if they have a degraded land, their incomes will reduce and they will automatically migrate somewhere. So in terms of documentation or evidence of this, we will need support from the people to have scientific research on this, and we will be happy to facilitate anyone who is interested in this.
Super. Thanks so much, Azmat, for those great answers. And I do think that issue about governments not having resources, and not just being in Pakistan, but many other places, is something that we can maybe come back to later on. Thank you again, Azmat, for your presentation. I'm going to pass over to Razabul, who's going to be talking to us from Bangladesh on the coast project of ICO on the salinity affected coastal flooding and how they're adapting to that. Razabul, if I may.
Thanks, Manisha and Nishani, for giving me the floor, and welcome everybody from Bangladesh. Nishani already introduced me as the monitoring, evaluation and learning coordinator for a saline agriculture project here in Bangladesh, are being implemented by Eco Portfolio, the Netherlands-based NGO, and we here focus on the climate smart food system development. And as a part of the focus, these projects are being implemented here in Bangladesh. Next slide, please. We see two major climate change impact issues discussed from Mr. Mihir and Azmat. And here I would like to discuss another crucial impact of climate change, the effect of climate change, that is increasing salinity. We know the direct impact of climate change is the global warming, which contribute to increase the sea level, and which ultimately affects our soil and water to be degraded through inundating with the saline water, and the croplands are being fallow due to losing their productivity, and the irrigation water are also being degraded due to increasing salinity. So ultimately, the effects are falling on the farmers, coastal farmers, who are being affected on the increasing salinity. So farmers are losing their production as well as income. They are being demotivated, and ultimately which has contributed to rural-urban migration. Some of the coastal farmers are being migrated to the urban area for alternative jobs. So that's a big problem. We address this problem along with some other minor problems, like our coastal farmers have some skill gap or awareness gap on saline agriculture techniques, and some climate smart technologies should have been available, but there was no resources there, And we found another crucial problem there was no salt tolerant seeds to grow, which seed varieties can be grown in the saline area. To analyze this problem, just I want to show a global picture that globally already 62 million hectares land are already been affected by salinity, and every day 2,000 hectares of land are being inundated by salinity every day. And in Bangladesh, as a delta, low-lying delta, Bangladesh is suffering a lot due to increasing salinity. And out of the 19 coastal districts, already 30% of land are already being inundated with salinity. And a study shown that by 2050, around 52% land will be inundated with salinity. So it's a big threat for us. So we targeted the major districts which are mostly affected by salinity, and the project was being implemented from since 2017, and it's ended in this year February. As we got another scale-up project through absorbing the learnings and challenges from the earlier project. Next slide. So this project, we got some intervention design to get the solutions to come out from the problem. So we actually narrowed down the problem is the effect on the crop production of salinity. So we have partnered with the Netherlands-based research institute, and now we collaborated with the private company who can make the salt tolerant seeds available. And the project focused on some Netherlands-based cultivation technology, as well as the technologies from the Bangladesh Research Institute. At first, we set up a research station to validate the saline tolerant cultivation technologies at the field level, and then we worked with 5,000 farmers who are really salinity affected farmers, and out of 5,000, 200 demonstration farmers we have selected and trained them to establish their demonstration plot. And the third step, 4,800 group farmers were also capacitated on this saline agriculture technologies. And in that stage, the 200 demonstration farmers who are being capacitated by the project act like a teacher for the community. So is the factor of sustainability, like when the project ends, actually we left a resource person or a teacher on saline agriculture who can teach saline agriculture technologies, guide the community people to continue this sustainable technologies. And then after covering the 5,000 direct farmers, to invite the community people, private sector and public department, relevant line department personnel, local elite to see the technologies, the impact and the solutions through farmers field day, and we organize some video shows on the impact and the technologies. And you see then the three brown cells, which is which can be which cannot be sequenced under sequence, but this can be set at any stage of the project. Like our farmers have the problem with the linkage with import market. They don't have the salt tolerant inputs. They have problem with the output market as well. And so we have some intervention to link them with some activities with input suppliers, and also get a sustainable solution with the utmost market facilities. And we continuously collaborated with the government line departments and private companies like seed companies who can come up with the solutions to the coastal salinity affected farmers. And from each of the steps, we captured learning and challenges so that all the learning and challenges can be addressed to a future scale-up project. Next slide, please. Here is some technologies just I'm going through very quickly, like some reach farrow methods, which are very new to the coastal farmers to tackle the salinity. And as rainwater harvesting method is very traditional, but we combined two irrigation methods to make innovative method. Like at the third slide, you see is the pitcher's irrigation method. It's actually a soil or mud-made pot, which can keep the soil moisture for a long time, and one pot of water can irrigate one tree for around 1 month. So it's a great nature-based solution, or we can say it water convenient and best low-cost irrigation solutions for the coastal salinity affected farmers. For no irrigation water, they have some water, but salinity is the main barrier. And then the mulching is very common, but some innovative ideas introduced to the farmers. And organic fertilizer preparation, organic pesticides. We always focused on the climate-friendly technologies, which will never degrade the environment or soil quality. And the new thing we introduced, like to the coastal community of salinity affected farmers, like salinity testing of their cropland and the irrigation water, which is crucial actually. Without knowing the salinity level of the cropland and irrigation water which they're using for their crop production, actually it is difficult to prescribe for a technical person to which crop varieties can be grown in this soil, which technologies can be introduced, which will be best fit to this salinity affected land. Next slide, please. After 4 years of project, salt solution project, we got some good impact, like couple of farmers were trained and they adopted saline agriculture technologies as they got the results. 5 years back or 6 years back, they were farmers who got the crop production whole the year, but recently, due to the saline intrusion, those farmers found difficult crop production, and they found that the cost is become higher than the production cost. So they are being demotivated. But after the results were demonstrated, they actually really motivated towards the saline agriculture technology, and they back into crop production again. And we got some results like increased crop production of up to 50%, and ultimately farmers tried to increase income, which motivated them. And also with the community session, as we educated them on the nutrition and vegetable consumption, so their consumption of vegetable also increased. But the vital thing I want to mention here is the rural urban migration has decreased. Like one case I want to say, when I was talking with a farmer, his son, 1 year back, his son was migrated to the urban area for alternative jobs. But due to pandemic, his son, the farmer's son, was jobless, and after losing jobs, he came back to his village, and he saw that before 1 year he left his village just due to increased salinity, and their land were fallow. So he find difficult to stay in the village without any income. That's why he left the village. But after coming back due to pandemic, he saw that their land is productive again. So he is motivated that I will never migrate to urban for alternative jobs, get the solutions. So I will stay here with my father, and I will do the agriculture again. And another survey findings we got that at the baseline we found that 1.28 household members are engaged with agriculture in the coastal farmers household. But at the end of 4 years, we surveyed 240 farmers sample wise, and we got 2.3 members. So engagement of household members increased with the agriculture. This is also a point of motivation for the farmers. Next slide, please. We got some learning. But learning never stopped. Actually, still we are learning. After 4 year project, we got another scale-up project. We addressed all the learnings and challenges from the last 4 year project. We understood the context. We kept some expensive irrigation system, but later on we found that those are not feasible in the local context. So we modified our design for introducing the low-cost irrigation techniques. Then we found research and extension can be taken together, which was not in common practice in our area actually. So through demonstration, but in the same area we did research, and at the same time we demonstrated the technologies which community farmers saw and they were being motivated. And through salinity testing, we saw that this is a very powerful tool for prescribing crop varieties and solutions to the salinity affected farmers. Then, as part of circular economy, we found some useful contribution of our prescribed technologies, like we use the rainwater for irrigation, and with the same crop plant for whole years using some cropping pattern, and we use the organic cultivation methods, and keeping the crop residues in the cropland to keep the land fertility intact. And ultimately we got the solutions to the fallow land that though having increased salinity, it is possible to grow crops in the salinity affected land using the technologies. Thank you. Next slide, please. Yes, I'm going very fast here because already the challenges are mentioned at the end of the projects. We still have the challenge like a lack of available salt tolerant seeds. In the salt solution project, we use some imported seeds for demonstration, but still we feel we don't have locally available salt tolerant seeds. So we engage private sector for research and validate some salt tolerant seeds so that those locally available seeds, locally produced seeds, can be made available to the farmers. At the same time, we found some challenges to bring public sector, public department, and private sectors on board together to promote the saline agriculture technologies. And in the university curriculum, we say that in Bangladesh, no saline agriculture chapter here. So we collaborated and we have partnered with the agriculture university to include a chapter on saline agriculture, and motivated them to enroll PhD students to research on those. And women are always in challenge in the coastal belt, so we continuously emphasizing on the women engagement with agriculture, and for the farmers who are salinity affected always feel the necessity of access to finance for their lack of purchasing capacity. And the market gap is always there because in the local market they are getting low price. So all these challenges combinedly we addressed in the next scale-up project, which are being implemented and will end up to 2024. Next slide, please. Ultimately, this is the project design, absorbing all the 4 years learning and challenges. We developed this intervention design for the new project, and learning never ends. Learning will continue. So after end of this project by 2024, again we will get some more learning and challenges to address for the here we will engage private sector for the sustainable solution. We will get public department, academic institution, and public sector at a single platform, which we call ETI platform. Through aggregation, local level aggregation point, farmer will get a solution for their output marketing. Through saline agriculture curriculum and the university level, the concept will be expanded throughout the student through knowledge hub. And women engagement, already we targeted 50% at least to women will be our targeted farmers. And if we establish some local level entrepreneur and we can make some sustainable model of advisory support at the community level, that will sustain and that will be a big solution. When we will left, then some people, some resources, some community people will be there to give these advices and services to the community people. Thank you. This is all from my side.
Thank you, Razibul. We are actually getting quite a few questions from our participants. Maybe I'll go on to one of the questions that Zakaria has, is how much of this salt solution therapy will cost to treat a hectare of land is one, and he has a few. And is it affordable to lower income farmers, including women? And is this a replicable approach by farmers without help from outside partners? And that's one. And I think another one that's kind of related to the inclusion of women farmers is from Fiona on, would you have any data on how women farmers are benefiting from this intervention? Is it relevant for them as well? I think you answered a bit of it, but it would be good to maybe expand a little bit more. Over.
Thank you. That's a good question. Actually, the technologies, saline agriculture technologies we intended to promote at the coastal belt, we always search for some low-cost technologies, nature-based solutions, which can be affordable to the poor marginal farmers. And we always focus on the sustainability issue. We always collaborated on the public line departments and private sector on board so that they can come up together to bring a long-term solution. So this is very difficult for one single institution to come up with a solution, but when all the stakeholders will be at the same page, then the solution will be easier. The first question was about the cost per hectare is much more lower, because you see the land preparation cost is very minimum. There is the region farm method, it doesn't cost much, and the irrigation cost is almost no cost. Like we prescribe always to use the natural resources like rainwater. You harvest the rainwater, use the innovative method like which we introduce, pitcher's method, a small pot of mulch which can preserve water for more than 1 month, and it can preserve the soil moisture, and it can irrigate without disrupting the soil quality and the plant growth. and always we concentrated on the organic pesticides and fertilizer, so farmers can easily prepare those. The farmers know don't need not to buy those from external. So if farmers are passionate to adopt these technologies, they can easily adopt, and the cost is very low. So per hectare, the cost in uh, uh, if I calculate in USD, it will be not more than 100 USD, and it's my assumption. I have to calculate for accurate figures, but it will be not more than 100 USD. So if you make a cost benefit analysis, that will make much better profit for the farmers. And regarding the women farmers, yes, in the last project we also engaged 63% women. Out of 5,000, there were almost 3,200 women there. So at the beginning, we struggled to engage women, like they have some lack of access to land, and when uh, women were engaged with our interventions, their family members saw that the women member of that family can contribute to the family income through engaging with agriculture actively, not passively. Then the religious barriers, social barriers, uh, become flexible in some instances, but it's not completely come out, but it's coming easily. Our intention is to engage more women farmers so that this problem will come out, because only men farmers cannot do alone on come up with the solution for huge saline affected farmers. If men and women work together, then there will be greater impact. Uh, that is our focus, and it's new project. Already we have engaged 52% women. We have selected recently. We have selected 2,000 farmers. Out of 2,000, almost 1,100 are women, and they are their effort is being greater, like men and women are working together. They are adopting the technologies positively. And so you know that in the northern part of Bangladesh, is women have less barriers, social barriers, religious barriers. But in southern area, we feel more of women gender-related barriers. But we are trying to come up with the solution so that the society community can understand that they can contribute from the front um, for the income of the family.
Thanks so much, Razabullah, for those responses. And I think that's really great that you've been involving women. Fiona sort of asked, could you not increase the 50% or the 53% to a higher percentage of women? We also have a couple of clarification questions that have come in. John was asking, just to be clear, are the solutions reducing salinity or increasing crop production, or is it both that you're able to do with the work that you're doing? And also, just if you can maybe provide a little bit more explanation on the organic pesticide production. You'd mentioned that farmers can do that on their own, but is that something that requires external support to understand how to develop those organic pesticides, or is that something that is already well known? And then another question around, is there any evidence around government or other NGOs taking up this salinity reducing interventions that you've been doing, or are there elements that need to be done there to encourage that further? Maybe particularly also the points you raised about the reduction from rural to urban migration because of your interventions. Is that something that the government is picking up and seeing as something to promote in other areas and to support in other areas? Thanks.
It's a good question. Let me answer the first one. as the technology is reducing the salinity actually. You know that as a global problem, and this is there is no low-cost technology to reduce the salinity in the soil and water actually. There are some expensive technologies which are not affordable to the poor farmers. So we are making our farmers adaptive to the nature-based solution, low-cost solutions, which actually doesn't reduce the salinity, but it manages the salinity. It uses some technologies. Through using those technologies, even crops can be grown in the saline-affected land. That doesn't mean that it's reducing the salinity, but it's managing salinity. And regarding another question, like our engagement of public government institute in Bangladesh, we have one um, soil research institute who are doing research on saline agriculture technologies. They are innovating some new technologies, and they have some mandate to uh, 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 to cope up with the increasing problems. So we regularly communicating with the government research institute, and they are very positive to collaborate jointly with us. Like we are doing some research and extension at the field level, and they are doing some research at the laboratory and as a confined area. So we have a government agriculture extension department who are solely responsible for the extension of those technologies. They have extensive staff coverage. So we are collaborating regularly, and they have the positive intention because they have also mandated to increase the food production through the adoption of the climate smart technologies. So we are in the same page. That's why government extension department and government research department are in line, and we are collaborating along with the private sector as well, so that private sector will come up with the input solution, and the government research institute will come up with a research solution. And as an NGO, we also contributing through using some of our innovations and the foreign technologies, which can be tested and justified in the local context if it is possible. That will be another addition. So our government departments are also contributing regarding their solution.
Thank you so much, Rezabul, and thanks again for your presentation. I think the example that you've provided of adaptation to something that is happening as a result of climate change has been really interesting, and I think something that many have already said that they can learn from. I want to throw back to the broader panel, because I think we've got a really interesting question, which Azmat has already answered in writing, but I wanted to give all of you a bit of an opportunity to come in on, particularly as you've all highlighted that even though the countries from which you're coming are contributing very little in terms of greenhouse gases, the impact of climate change is much greater on you. So a little bit of that justice element. And Getchu had asked, what would you say toward climate justice and the scope and role that humanitarian actors could play in terms of advocacy around climate justice? I don't know which of you might want to come in on that first. I know that Azmat, you'd already answered it, but maybe you want to expand on that, and then we give Mahir and Rezabul a chance to answer.
Thank you so much. I wanted to make it clear that many times with the technology, we do ask the questions, but we then do not know how to find the answer, like where the person has responded. But I am the one. The participants I know, they all of them are like quite better than me in the use of technology. This is really an important question. Like climate change. Here again in Pakistan, we joke about it that climate change or the emission of greenhouse gases is a sin which is committed by the rich people. And then the rich people ask the poor people to repent on their behalf and to sustain this carbon sink and everything. So as humanitarian organizations, even if someone is not working in the humanitarian sector, this is just a question of humanity, and this is just a question of justice. That if a country or if a community is not having any contribution to the emission of the greenhouse gases globally, but they are worst affected by it, so we should raise this this issue on multiple forums, and at least those countries and those economies who are contributing a lot of greenhouse gases, they are not directly impacted by the climate change, but they should contribute to increasing the resilience or adaptation capacity of those communities who are affected by the climate change. So yes, this is a question of justice, and every human being needs to raise their concerns to whatever level they can. This is my take on this. Thank you so much.
Thanks very much, Azmat. And I think that's a really important point, that it is, it's a collective thing that we all need to be really fighting for. Mihir Razabul, did you want to come in on that question around the role of humanitarian organizations on climate justice?
Others up? After you.
Yeah, Mr. Mihir, I'm requesting you to come up with the answer.
Okay, sure. No, this is a very important area, and as humanitarian agencies and those who work in the humanitarian sector, we need to address this, because we can very easily feel very good by responding to humanitarian crises and making sure people have food and water, and keep on doing it again and again and again and again, and not realizing why this is happening. I think the climate justice issue, as far as the humanitarians are concerned, has sort of three major areas. One is the climate justice between the polluter and those who are affected by the pollution, and that may be, depending upon what the unit is, the polluter country and the polluter country which is, and the country which is affected, which is global. It can be a polluter industry and those who are affected, which is global. It can be a polluter community and those who are affected. And even within the country, there are some cities which are more polluting than some rural areas. So it's a very tricky issue as far as the justice is concerned, that what's the unit of our analysis? And that's something we need to keep in mind as far as humanitarian respondents are concerned. We can't address all of it, but if you are aware of that, some of that could be addressed. That's one. Second is the rich and the poor. So those who can afford to respond to the pollution, there were clean air, for example, in Delhi, and people can afford to have air cleaning machines in their home, and they then respond by having that. But those who can't buy such machines, what do they do? So I think the whole issue of rich and the poor. And third is the issue of past and the present. And that is that at present you may not be polluting, but in future you are likely to, if you take a certain economic path, if you take a certain recovery after a disaster. So are we going to turn into a polluter, which is larger footprint as far as greenhouse gases are concerned and carbon footprint is concerned, water footprint is concerned? And if we are going to so how do you stop that? So those are the 3 or 4 areas of climate justice that humanitarian actors need to. There isn't much work done on that, and that's something I would highly recommend, both for those who are on the part of action and actually responding, but also as far as research, evaluation, co-creating knowledge, and that part. That what is the nature of climate justice that the humanitarian sector should be addressing and looking at first? Of course, we need to look at everything, but is there something which is naturally under our nose which we are not looking for? Thank you very much. I think in the end, we will have to rethink the way the humanitarian action unfolds. And unless, to say it simply, maybe a bit of a cliche, But unless the humanitarian sector isn't green enough and clean enough, we will not be responding. And that's the big question. How do we become more green and clean in everything that we do? Thank you.
Thanks, Mihir. Absolutely. I think, and this is also why I think the charter is a very important component, because it does address these different aspects of looking at how do we ensure we're supporting communities to build their resilience and look at incorporating adaptation measures, but at the same time, how are we also minimizing our impact on the environment and doing no harm or doing good or doing better than we actually could, right? I think we all want to leave the planet in a better position state than it is now. And I think in that way, we will of course have this conversation in our next webinar on the greening, do no harm, environment friendly practices. But one of the things I think that we also have as a question that comes up is, in order to do all the work we're doing as humanitarian actors in now with this climate change, environment impacts, looking at more in areas where we're not used to sometimes as organizations, but also while as Azmat said, most of organizations are looking at what the need of the community is. If we are looking at the need of the community, it's easier to respond and do our programming. But how could we increase this engagement? Is there partnerships that we would need to improve on? What sort of how could we increase and facilitate that engagement in an adaptation focus and adaptation mindset of the humanitarian sector would be my question. And I'm not sure who from you would be interested in answering first. Maybe Azmat, maybe Mihir, Razibul, to that. Over.
Azmat sir, up for my.
Thank you so much. During whatever Nishani was discussing, I was sort of mentally in those gullies where we have provided all those. So my apologies, Nishani, that if I have missed the questions, like the crux of the question, then I would respond.
No worries. I think it was more asking what would we need to do to improve as humanitarian actors? What sort of engagement do we need to take place, be it partnerships, be it different avenues of working? It's a very broad question in looking at this adaptation and adapting to climate and environment crisis.
Yes, thank you so much. And someone has had asked it in written questions, and I responded it over there as well, that till now, traditionally, the humanitarian actors had been focusing on life-saving activities, time-critical activities, and things like these. And in the long run, we have to think about, we have to find ways of reducing the vulnerability of these people in the long run. And some of the solutions are already in your question, that increasing the partnerships, deepening the partnerships, they are the key. But as part of us, humanitarian, we need a lot of mind shift in the programming. Wherever we are designing a program, we should take into account that what aspect of this climate change adaptation can be added, or what can we do for these communities with whom we are working, so that they do not need the humanitarian assistance this frequent or this regular like they are needing it now. So it needs a focus of the mindset among the people who are designing the programs. It needs advocacy and mind shift of those people who are the donors and who are funding your interventions, that yes, we are going to have this humanitarian interventions, but this humanitarian intervention, linking it with the upcoming webinar, that in addition to do no harm, actually contribute to longer and sustainable benefits of these communities. So the donors also need to shift their mentality, and that is my take. Thank you.
So, you want me to add, Nishani?
Go ahead, Mihir.
Sure. I think I'll add to that question as well as something that Yusufi from ECWA has asked as well, which is coordination. And I think both of them are quite together. And that is, one is this whole enterprise of adapting to sort of bringing adaptation into a humanitarian response needs one, a multi-level engagement. So though we very much want and definitely want localization, but the engagement of the local actors has to be multi-level. So they must demand a national plan for heat wave action, for example. So that's one. Second is you also need very much a multi-year program. So it is not something you can finish at the first 9 months at the DEC for years as promoted. But this is something, of course, we need those first 9 months, but we also need to have much larger engagement, longer engagement, and that is something we need to think quite seriously again. And third is the multi-sector. And we must look at starting with employment and food, but no intervention which is sort of cluster-wise, only one sector is going to help us move to the adaptation, because the nature of adaptation is such that it's never single sector nature of adaptation. So those are the three recommend. And all these three are not possible if you don't have a multi-year funding or resources. So how do even disaster response, immediate response funding has some way of being multi-year? And maybe 80% is in first 3 months and remaining 10% in first 9 months, but something which allows you to do that longer term perspective to do that. That's would be my response. And there was a question also about which is that what do we actually do as far as humanitarian sector is concerned? And this is I'm drawing from, and this is my personal drawing, not necessarily the paper will say that, but there was a lessons learned exercise that Annab had very kindly taken up, and my reflections on that. And I think the report is going to be out very soon, so all of you will be able to see that. But one, that as a humanitarian sector, what is it that we do so our being green and clean substantially reduces the mortality due to not being green and clean? And that's the first target we should need to set up. And with the charter that ICWA has, I think we can very well set up that as a very clear target. That how do we reduce that? How do we reduce the loss of livelihoods due to not being clean and green? And that's the second target that we can very clearly set up with the charter that we have. The third is that how do you reduce the direct economic losses that we will be suffering by not being green and clean? And we have the economics to tell that, the humanitarian action which is not green is more costly than humanitarian action which is clean in a short run. So that could be third target. And I think we can work on that, all of us, 142 who joined and 76, I think, who are here, to make this even more concrete. That what are the sort of 6, 7 targets that we need to take now that the charter is there? How do we operationalize charter by focusing on 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, some sort of targets directly? Thank you.
Razabul, did you want to come in on any final thoughts there as well?
Yeah, I would like to add a small thing. The partnership is very important, and we have to deep dive on the problems. We have to know the context. We have to see the affordability, adaptability at the local context of the solutions which we have taken into consideration for the solution of for a climate change impact or the effect or consequence. Whatever the problem is, whatever is the salinity problem or heat is a problem, is the sea level rising is a problem, or the flooding is a problem. Whatever the problem is, actually partnership is very important. Like with the public sector have to become up to contribute, line department for environmental issues, Department of Environment and the Disaster Ministry have to be streamed to come up with the solution. Like as an example, for our interventions, so we collaborated with the Ministry of Environment so that we can align with their mandate. They have some mandate, they have some targets. So, and our donor have some visions, and our organization as the implementer, we have some visions. So, if we can align all the mandates, all the visions at the same page, then that will give a greater impact. For a sustainable solution, actually is not a one-shot intervention. Like I can do it for 1 year and I will get a solution for 100 years. That's not like that. So all the stakeholders have to come up at a single page with a single mandate, and partnership is very important for that. And the community demand, we have to check the community demand, what actually is needed at the community level. Without knowing the facts and figures, without having the research findings, just with a problem, we cannot jump on the intervention design. So it's my personal opinion that before designing a intervention, actually we need to focus on the issue, we need to focus on the problems, we need to deep dive on the problems. What are the risks? What are the risk mitigation plans? What are the consequences of the intervention? How will the intervention be sustainable even after the end of the project? So after knowing all these, we can come up with the solution for the partnership, and always need collaboration with all the line departments, government department, private sector, humanitarian actors. Everybody has to be at the same page for a greater solution. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And a huge thanks to all our panelists, and apologies for going a little bit beyond. We'll keep you another couple minutes. But thank you very much, Mahir, Azmat, and Razibul. I think you gave us great examples of what you're doing in terms of climate change adaptation. We heard very much about the response around heat waves in India and how the impact is also intersectional, how women farmers are having to adapt to that. Azmat talked to us very much about how the nature-based solutions are a way of also adapting to climate change. And then finally from Razibul in terms of dealing with the salinity that's coming from climate change. I think the real important parts that came out from what you've said is that we need to be looking at what are some of the national level plans that we have, making sure that we advocate for whether it's a national heat wave plan, engaging national government, but it has to be multi-level and multi-sectoral so that we're also engaging communities, looking at what it is that we can do best to support them, making sure that we're engaging men, women, and boys and girls as well when it comes to really the adaptations that are necessary. As humanitarians, we need to be looking at how we can be much less isolated from those climate adaptation systems that are happening so that we've got that greater linkage between what humanitarian organizations are doing and thinking about the climate change that's happening so that our interventions can be adapted so that we're looking at longer term life-saving interventions and not just that short-term perspective that we've often got. So really figuring out how do we as humanitarian organizations adapt our program so that we are looking at the context and understanding how we can better contribute to climate change adaptation. I think also considering, what are some of the roles in terms of climate justice as humanitarian organizations, perhaps having a little bit more of that research to identify where as humanitarian organizations we best can come in on climate justice, even if it's an issue that affects all of us as individuals. What can we as humanitarian organizations do there? And I think as Azmat said, it's a real mindset mindset shift in our programming and how we're approaching things, doing that analysis of what's the context reservoir, as you said, and then really working, Mahir, as you said, at those multi-levels in terms of engagement and multi-sectoral, and really thinking about what are the partnerships that we need to put in place so that as humanitarian organizations, we are doing our best to not make things worse, but make things better in terms of the climate change that and changes in the environment that we're seeing. That's a little bit of a summary. I apologize for the overtime. Our next session is going to be on, before I do that, a recording of the event, both video and audio only podcast, will be available on the event page, which is in the slide right now, in the coming days. And our next session will take place 24th, in which we will be focusing on Commitment 2 of the Climate Charter and how to minimize the negative environmental impact of our humanitarian work. So really picking up there, Mahir, on what you were saying at the end around what we can do to make sure that we're doing much better. I'd like to thank also on behalf of Nishani and ICFA, a huge thanks to all of you for participating. Apologies for the delay. Huge thanks to our panelists, all of your questions, really appreciate it, and for answering the questions, panelists. Anna Maria for captioning and for a really great discussion today. I think it's really helping us set the stage for putting that climate charter into action. Thank you very much. Nishani, I'll let you say the final thank you.
Thank you, and look forward to the next webinar. It's going to be as interesting, and we will also have a donor perspective in there. So that will be quite interesting to talk about the long-term financing that we mentioned. Yep. Take care, everyone. Thanks so much. Bye.
Thank you all.
Thank you very much. Bye.